So, MA Live Art. What is an MA and why study at postgraduate taught level? Well, an MA is maybe more intense, a bit more specialised. It asks you maybe to be more independent. That's not maybe, it definitely asks you to be more independent. And because this talk was really aimed at sort of undergraduate students here at QM, it's important not to think of it as a fourth year of undergraduate. I think it's a definite shift from undergraduate gear. It's a sort of step change in intensity, in ambition, independence. And it's an opportunity to undertake research, write and make performances at a higher level of intellectual engagement and rigour. And maybe Dominic can just sort of take over and talk a little bit more about why study at postgraduate taught level.
Great. So, thank you, Julia. So we'll talk a little bit about what the MA Live Art programme can ideally enable for you in a bit. But I thought just to add that, you know, we live in a climate in which postgraduate study is very much valued and in some ways expected of people entering into work in the cultural and creative industries. This is partly because it means that you demonstrate that you've amassed a higher level of knowledge and expertise. It also, I think, is because it gives you an additional layer of what might be called transferable skills, but the capacity to engage in an intellectually rigorous and challenging mode with types of knowledge, unfamiliar modes of practice, and so on. So I would hope that that's what this program, but also postgraduate study in general, would seek to provide for you. It is clearly much more independent, and that is both a challenge and actually a pleasure of postgraduate study. The only thing I'll just say more is that if you want to talk later towards the end about just what postgraduate study involves, but also maybe comparatively between what Queen Mary drama programs can provide versus programs at other universities, you know, don't feel shy about asking us that. For those of you who are students here, you should also really feel free to talk to your advisors about what particular programs you can do. None of us will feel sort of protective about, you know, making sure you come here. We'll all be able to advise you on other programs too, including ones beyond this discipline.
Great, thanks very much. Okay, so the next question maybe to ask is, what is live art? And Dominic is going to answer that.
Great. So, I mean, live art is a contested category, so there are competing and contradictory definitions of what this might be. So, Live Art Development Agency, with whom we're partnered on the MA Live Art, defines it as a cultural engine, a kind of space, a laboratory in which new ideas, new practices, new modes of cultural, creation are tested and then get inserted into the more mainstream culture. For us, I think we sympathize very much with that idea, thinking of live art as the kind of cutting edge of cultural practice. But we also think about it in a kind of promiscuous way, which is to say we look forward in this program, but also in the work that we all do as live art researchers and practitioners. We think about live art as a sort of as occurring at the margins of culture, but also as that which gets trafficked into the mainstream. So in one way of talking about that might be to say that live art hinges on more traditional practices in the theatre. It hinges on and critically responds to more traditional practices in the visual and fine arts, but it also falls between them. So it might, live art is a way of thinking about modes of performance-based practice that challenge our assumptions about those more traditional practices, more traditional histories, more traditional spaces of presentation and validation and legitimation. Live art is vital, lively, productive, provocative, and it also then speaks to part of the contradiction or the dilemma of its terminology is that live art can also mean performance art. It can also mean body-based practice more broadly. It can mean time-based art. It can mean action-based art, durational performance, endurance-based performance, site-specific performance, installation-based performance, protest, one-to-one performance, dance, club performance, cabaret, video performance, and so on. And that's part of the brilliant promiscuity of the term that I think we as scholars, but also as people on potentially on this MA live art will sort of celebrate. So, which is a way to say that we don't sort of fetishize a particular mode or sector or series of spaces or similar. We approach the idea of live art inclusively in order to actually challenge the assumptions about what live art might mean. That said, if you're especially interested or exclusively interested in more traditional practices, you might not feel well served by this program. So one way to talk about that is that there are many programs where you might have an option to choose a bit of a live art, but you can more crucially work on more traditional things, and this might not be the program for you if that's your approach. Which leads us into a new slide, which is about MA Live Art. I think this is me as well, continuing.
Yeah, well, I'll just sort of talk a little bit about the live art program here. Introduces you to radical art practices and encourages you to create groundbreaking original work. You'll explore your ideas in the context of live art theory with the support and guidance of distinguished industry professionals, artists and researchers, and you'll also develop your professional skills and networks to take your career to the next level. So there are some really key features to live art. This particular sort of program, which Dominic is going to introduce us to.
So it's important to note that MA Live Art is the first program of its kind in the UK. It's also the second kind in the world. So there's also a program in Finland, and we are the only programs that focus exclusively on live art, performance art, and experimental performance practices. So there are other programs where, as I suggested earlier, where you can create a pathway for yourself by focusing more on experimental work. But we are special because we enable you to focus it on experimental practice in relative isolation. The second key feature is the partnership with LADA, the Live Art Development Agency. So LADA is the Center for Live Art. It's an organization that is in its 20th year, and it undertakes development activities, advocacy, programming for live art. It also has an incredible archive, and it acts as a research hub. There's a lot typically going on there. There are events, there are lots of resources and so on. And so as a MA Live Art student, you will be based really across both spaces, both across Queen Mary and its resources, as well as in the Live Art Development Agency itself, which is based in Bethnal Green. And the teaching itself also takes place across both. So the seminars for Live Art Histories, for example, which we'll talk about in a bit, they happen in both spaces. There's also direct input from the staff, the incredible staff at the Live Art Development Agency. The third key feature is experts. So you get to work with experts in the field, including scholars and artists and arts professionals in our department. So we're able to boast, there's me and Julia being an amazing artist, and many others as well, Martin O'Brien, Lois Weaver, and others frequently teach on the program. You also get to encounter visiting speakers who either come to teach lectures or masterclasses or to teach practical workshops. And so a few examples over the last couple of years have included Rosalie Goldberg, in some ways the founder of performance art studies, taught in Live Art Histories with me and Lois Keedon, the critic Morgan Quaintance, artists such as Ansuman Biswas, Ron Athey, Anne Bean, Lauren Barry Holstein, and many others. Thirdly, resources. So, as I mentioned, you have access to the incredible resources at LADA, including many that aren't otherwise available to visitors. You have access to supporting or participating in their programming. You can undertake formal or informal placements, their contacts and networks. But also at Queen Mary, you get access to a whole range of facilities, including staff members, teaching spaces, workshop and performance spaces, including the Pinter, the Film and Drama Studio, and 3 rehearsal rooms, access to the library, access to Queen Mary Archives, which now has the archives of the 1970s performance artist Ian Hinchliffe, the disabled activist artist Catherine Araniello, and the body modification pioneer John John. And then you have access to other things as well, like Senate House and so on. What's important also is a key feature of the program is a revisionist approach, which means that there are a number of histories that are deemed sort of relevant or necessary to understanding live art. What we seek to do in this program, but in I think all of our teaching, is to put pressure on that assumption, which is to say we'll enable you to understand the kind of authoritative histories of live art, but we want also to revise that assumption of what a necessary history of live art might look like by thinking about global, transnational, and otherwise different or inclusive histories and genealogies that create the present. So we try as hard as we can together to be sensitive to issues of race and gender, sexuality, ability, nationality, and urge ourselves and each other to think broadly and against the grain in terms of inclusivity. Finally, politics. Well, this sort of extends that previous point in some ways to say that this program is committed to exploring and animating the politics of live art, which is to think about identity, to think about the politics of interventions in public space, the efficacy of activism, the possibility of live art as eco-critique, the relation between human and non-human animals in live art, technology, new media, pedagogy, community, these other aspects of life that might become enlivened or scrutinized anew in when placed under the kind of microscope that live art and its study enables. Julia.
Fantastic, thank you. So let's look a little bit more sort of closely at what modules are offered on the MA Live Art here, and this is the list. So in semester 1 you have Live Art Histories, which is a compulsory module. Dominic is just going to tell you a little bit about that.
Yeah, Live Art Histories is a seminar module, one of the ones that happen both at QM and at the Live Art Development Agency, and it looks at and creates essentially a history for the emergence and development of live art. So it looks at social contexts and genealogies of live art. It looks at live art in relation to histories of visual art, and the problem of historiography, which is not just which histories and what do histories consist of, but how does a history come to be known, come to be made, come to be kind of implanted in and authorized by institutions, and then how does it come to be written anew? So we look at problems of documentation, mediation, archiving, institutionalization, and so on.
Great. Again, in semester 1 is Performance Lab, which is another compulsory module.
Yeah, and Performance Lab is a practical module that takes place in the Pinter, typically, in the Film and Drama Studio, rather, typically. It's led by, and I should say the previous one will be taught by Jen Harvey. The Performance Lab is taught by Martin O'Brien and includes amazing visiting artists. And it's an opportunity to work together, but also fundamentally alone, or sort of as a solo artist, developing processes and testing new processes for the production of live art. And the key emphasis is on you developing or sustaining or challenging your practice as an artist. It includes some people who might have very established practices. It also will include some people who are creating a practice for themselves. And we think it's very important that everyone does this module, because whether or not you identify as an artist, we think you need to understand what it means to put yourself at risk, not at physical risk necessarily, but at the kind of ontological risk of knowing what it means to show work to others and have it critiqued, have it scrutinized, and so on. And this is an image of Becky O'Brien performing in Performance Lab 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think the environment of the lab is also that thing of the peer support, and also being exposed to other people's ways of working, and that's always been very productive in Performance Lab, I think. Okay, so coming to semester 2, we have Disciplines of Live Art, which is again another compulsory module.
Yep, and Disciplines of Live Art is taught by Shane Boyle, and it looks at, so at the beginning I talked about the kind of challenging disciplinarity of live art itself, that it seems to belong in some ways to the study of theatre and performance, but could just as well exist in the study of, in and challenge or relate to the study of fine art, or the history of art, or dance studies, or certain approaches to photography studies, or new media, or similar. So this module looks at that problem head on. It thinks about the material conditions through which performance is made. It looks at the social infrastructures through which performance is made and shown and preserved and disseminated. How is it that performance enters into and circulates through festivals, for example? What's the relation between performance in commercial galleries, performance in museums? What kinds of performance get shown in museums? What kinds of performance get translated into saleable objects that allow them to be supported by commercial galleries, and so on? It therefore also opens onto questions of disciplinary critique, questioning the means by which knowledge has been produced, which builds upon the ideas in live art histories to some extent, but also thinks about institutional critique, the way that performance or live art seems to intervene in institutions to ask questions anew about how those institutions work, how they value art, how they exclude art, with what effects, especially with what effects for artists.
Okay, in semester 2 still, we have Research Design, which is a non-assessed compulsory module.
Yeah, so research design is essentially your dissertation preparation module. It occurs fortnightly, and it really builds skills and methods in research design. Which is to say that you will develop your own project, but also encounter discussions around methodology, around archival practice, around practice-based research, and so on. So it's a sort of reflective module, which is sort of empty of content in a way, because the focus is on method. Great.
And in semester 2, still the independent project, which is an elective module.
Yeah, so you can, independent practical project is, you can choose between two approaches essentially. One is the independent practical project, which is led by a visiting artist, and you essentially develop an independent practical project. You work on your own performance much more independently than you would have in Performance Lab, and you develop a work that is then shown. You can also choose the independent written project, which does much the same, but in a one-to-one process with a supervisor. And again, essentially, it's sort of a small dissertation. You have time to develop your own project, distinct from the kind of requirements and expectations and and similar of the program, in dialogue with a colleague.
Great. And then moving into the summer term, into semester 3, there's the dissertation or the practice-based dissertation.
Great. And actually what I should have said in the previous section was both was that the independent written project can be designed by you as a placement module, which would be undertaken at Live Art Development Agency. And so in the first semester, if that's what you were choosing, we could design that for you so that it was a research project based at LADA. I should also say that if you didn't want to choose either of those modules, you can also opt for a module in a different program, and we could help you decide on that. So there's modules, for example, in creative writing, or there's an art module in geography, or critical studies modules in English or similar. So the dissertation, you get an option between a written dissertation or the practice-based dissertation. You write for the written dissertation a substantial written piece of work. You're given a supervisor and led through the process of researching and writing an original contribution to the study of live art. If you do practice-based dissertation, you are developing a piece of substantial, independent artistic work, which you present through documentation. There are also options to present it in person, and then you write a critical reflection on that work. In that module, you're led by a module convener, but instead of having a supervisor from the academic staff, we allocate you a mentor. So you have an important, significant, exciting artist who will be invited in consultation with you to lead or mentor you in your independent practical work.
Great. So who might the MA Live Art be for? So these are some possibilities.
Great. So yeah, we think that the MA Live Art is designed for artists, scholars, arts professionals, creative producers, and curators. So artists will learn how to critically develop and frame your work. You'll find historical and other genealogies that make your work make sense, perhaps. You'll find structure and support to enable your practice. Many artists find it, once that they're out in the world without a university supporting them, they struggle to find access to space, to mentoring, to technical support, etc. And we would ensure that you have all of those things. It's also a way for artists to sort of move on to the next level of their practice. Some artists may feel, either in an undergraduate program or outside of it, that they sort of get stuck in a rut of sorts. And this is that kickstart to help you move on to a sort of a more independent, but also in some ways more professionalized way of working as an artist. For scholars, we think it is for those coming from a theatre, visual arts, or fine art perspective, for example, who are perhaps looking to focus and specialize. Many of you will have found that you have to balance your interests in live art with other kinds of interest because of the nature of the degree that you have been studying on. This is an opportunity to focus more exclusively. It's also a way to reposition your interests. Maybe you've been studying it from a very different perspective, and this is a way to refocus. It's also potentially preparation for PhD study. So for those of you who are interested in doing a PhD, this would be a means for you to gain access to one of those programs. And therefore, in that case, but also in other cases, it will help you develop your critical writing in scholarship, whether that's towards scholarly writing or towards journalism, reviewing, and similar. And similarly, I'll just say with arts professionals, creative producers, this is and curators to some extent, this is where LADA really comes in. You get to work with some of the most significant and experienced arts professionals in the field. You have direct access to them, to their networks, to their support, to their mentorship. And that is, I think, profoundly important. There are also opportunities to do this through our colleagues too. I think that's all I'll say about that, if that's okay.
Okay, good. So who should apply to MA Live Art? So those who investigate, make, enable, and those who are looking to develop their ability, reflexive capacity, develop networks and reach. And as we listed before, artists, scholars, arts professionals, curators, creative producers. So just to move on to this, I think, is a really crucial question. Why study live art as a standalone form?
Great. So I think that, I suppose, as I suggested already, that many people will have had the experience of studying live art in a kind of piecemeal fashion, because there are no undergraduate studies programs in live art, and there are otherwise no MA programs in live art. So you've necessarily studied it at the relative margins of a program of theatre studies or of fine art, typically. So it's an opportunity. MA Live Art is a unique opportunity to study it as a kind of standalone form, to think of it as in its own right a vital and exciting area of experimental arts practice, and to look away from the kind of the explanation of it that's given in other programs, in sort of, even in our program to some extent, which is that it helps you to think in different ways about theatre. Well, we think on the MA, live art is an opportunity to think about live art, its histories, institutions, its implications, its potentials, its efficacies, and so on. We also think that MA live art is fundamentally interdisciplinary. So the MA will require you to think beyond the refusal or refinement of theatre, but to think about visual studies, to learn about techniques and methodologies from art history, to apply and think through critical theory, especially as it relates to the body and its politics. It asks you to be reflexive about which disciplines are relevant, useful, productive, and indeed how the disciplines that you've been trained through might be irrelevant or redundant or otherwise not useful. So we also study live art in order to analyze, historicize, contextualize, critique, and make live art. And so that's important in terms of the different modes through which you'll study. So MA Live Art encourages you or requires you to participate in seminars, to attend lectures, to attend artist talks, to participate in workshops, to undertake placements, and also in non-COVID times to undertake field trips. I think that's it. That's me done for that moment.
Okay, great, thank you. So how to apply? Very simple. Just put MA Live Art QMUL into your search engine and click, and it'll take you to the homepage for MA Live Art. And you've got all the information that we've been talking through today. And then if you scroll right down to the bottom, you'll find out where you click to make your application. Part of the application process, you'll need to write a personal statement and provide a reference. We can talk a little bit more in the Q&A maybe about the nitty-gritty of that. Next, just to sort of talk about bursaries. In previous years, there has been a £1,000 alumni bursary for QM applicants, which has been supported through the Alumni Loyalty Award. We're still waiting to hear whether this is going to be available for this year, but those updates will be put on the website, so you'll be able to know whether that's running this year. There's also a full bursary, which is a fee waiver, basically, which is available for applicants who identify as Black, Asian, minority ethnic, global majority, or a person of colour. And there's a link on the website for more information on this and more information about bursaries in general, scholarships and other sorts of funding support. So dates, we're open for applications now to start in September 2021. That's this year. And this year the course is running as full-time only, so there's no part-time option this year. That's important for you to know. So we're just going to come out of PowerPoint and just open it up to discussion, questions.
And just one note to add to Julia's last point is that there's no deadline as such. I mean, there's a very final deadline at the end of August, but essentially you should apply as soon as you can. And by around end of May, June, we all go to a waiting list typically. So it's there's a benefit to applying earlier, but there's no sort of firm cut-off date before really the end of the summer. And also just to note that this image is of Finn Love, who's one of the people that works at Live Art Development Agency, posing in the study room. But also all the other images you've seen are from recent students performing in the MA Live Art.
Great, thanks. So, questions?
Also, Farouk's been very patient. Do you want to put it in chat or turn on your mic?
Farouk, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, you can ask either in chat or on the microphone as well.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course. It's a little bit ropey. Maybe try it in chat because the sound is a little bit crazy.
Oh, so nice of you. Thank you so much.
That's okay.
My first question is, I am graduated, and my subject was media studies, and my specialization was drama and film production. Can I eligible for this course?
Yes. So there's no specific requirement of what your qualification must be, except that it's a BA with a good 2-1 from drama and theatre or a relevant program. So your program should make you eligible because it's in a cognate subject.
Okay. And my second question is, how many fee I have to pay per semester? Include first time admission fee and other security funds.
So that information is given on the Queen Mary website. Faisal or Rupert, could you add the link?
Yeah. So if you just scroll up a bit in the chat, or I'll paste it again. So basically, in the course page, you have all the information about fees. It's kind of in the middle of the page. It's called Fees and Funding, and it goes through the full-time fees. And there's also links to scholarships, postgraduate loans, country-specific scholarships as well. So have a look. And we also have, if you're not from the UK, you can look up specific information for your country as well. So if you search for QMUL and your country, so if I was in France, just search for QMUL France, and you'll find all the information, including like relevant qualifications that will be relevant for this course. But I'll post the thing in the chat again.
Okay. I'm not from UK. I'm from Asia, Pakistan, and
we have a Pakistan office who can talk to you as well. So I'll try and send you a link, Farouk, which will link you up to the Pakistan office as well.
Okay, my last question is IELTS or TOEFL are required for this course?
Is what required, sorry?
IELTS or TOEFL.
Yes. So you need an IELTS of, I think it's
7.
It's 7 in each area or above.
But I have just English proficiency certificate that I got from my university, and my last degree is in English. My A level, O level, my bachelor, and my master's medium of transmission was English.
It would, so that would be, you would state that in your application, and it would be judged at the level of the at the point of application.
Okay, okay. So nice, Sophie. That's all. My question is over. So once again, thank you so much.
Thank you. So we have a question from Barbara, who's had a hand up for a while.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. First, there are two questions but interrelated. The first one is, how come you're not doing part-time this coming year? And secondly, on the full-time course, what sort of time commitment, workload, what are we kind of looking at on full-time versus part-time?
Great. Shall I answer that as well? Okay, so in terms of the part-time, it's because we had to suspend the program this year, and so that has meant because of obviously for COVID, and so we are bringing it back in a way that is more manageable, which means to do it full-time only, which will allow us to properly support and administer the program and the students. So it will be brought back in the future, but we just can't bring it back for this year. It also, we want to think about we're in the process of thinking about the structure of the part-time program, specifically because the program currently in its current form means that it has a somewhat unfortunate division between seminars in the first year and practice in the second, and we're dedicated to changing that, but we can't do that immediately, and so we will do that ready to relaunch in 2022, the part-time format. In terms of your other question, which was time, so what we try to do is you'll have, you have your, it depends on the modules essentially, but if you, in the first semester, you have live art histories, which is 3 hours per week, and then for performance lab you have 4 hours per week plus an additional 4 hours student-led practice. So that would be 7 hours of compulsory contact time with an additional 4 hours independent student-led time, but you're scheduled into a space. On top of that, and that's your hours for the first semester. In the second semester, it does depend on which option you take, but you will always have to do Disciplines of Live Art, which is 3-hour seminar. You do a 2-hour research design module every other week, and then you do either the independent written project, which is quite up to you to dictate how much time it takes in terms of contact hours, because it's not weekly necessarily. And then IPP, the independent practical project, is 4 hours per week plus a 4-hour scheduled student-led practice. So it does depend. The key thing to bear in mind is that many people, or indeed most people, work alongside, so it is manageable because you can sort of compartmentalize your time of studies. So you will typically have, well, you'll always have in the first semester, for example, performance lab on one day, and then your live art histories on the morning, typically, of another day. And so essentially you have a day and a half of scheduled time, and then you reorganize around that. Is that enough detail?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think my question was just, yeah, I've got work to manage and a kid as well. So yeah. I was just wondering if the workload was on a full-time was sort of realistic for someone in my position.
I think it is. I mean, it's designed to be. So I would say you would need to dedicate, I think, 2 days a week. But how beyond the and you know, for some people that might be longer, but it's depending on how long it takes for you to read or to develop your practice. Some people will do it full time in the sort of 5 days a week. Other people will do it 3 days a week, or find, you know, but beyond the schedule's day and a half, you'll be able to manage your own schedule. Great. There's some questions in the chat. So Babette has a question. What type of considerations are in place for COVID-19? Does the university plan to be in person? Does it plan to teach in person, and what would happen if we had to return to online learning? That's the golden question. So essentially, our understanding is that the programs will all go back to in-person as much as is possible and as much as is allowed within the government guidance as it applies in September 2021. The assumption that we're all working on is that that as much as possible will be in person, and that anything that includes large groups will be online still. That's probably the way that things will work, because we're working under the assumption and on quite vague guidance from the Department of Education about the extent to which social distancing will still apply. In a way, this doesn't relate to this program, in the sense that it's inevitably a small group. It's a small program. So we hope, all we can really, we have no special information really about what will happen in September, but we can only say that we will do as much in person as we can. If there are elements which have to be online, that might well mean it might mean that certain kinds of recorded material can be shared online. It's probably unlikely in this program. It could mean that we have elements that might need to be provided, especially if, you know, who knows, there might be sort of lockdowns emerging or similar. We of course hope and assume that that won't be the case. In terms of how we would do it, I suppose what's useful to know is that as a department, we have our undergraduate program is half practice, half seminar based, and I think we have excelled at transitioning both modes of practice, modes of learning rather, into an online situation. So we have really, I think, we've tried to be innovative and adaptable and so on in moving our teaching, including, and I think especially, our practice online. So I feel quite confident that that would be good, but I also feel optimistic that it won't be necessary. Do you have any idea? Okay, we've answered that one, Sarah, hopefully. And then Eloina, thank you for the info. Question, how is a mentor chosen in the practical dissertation? Are you able to request a specific artist? Yes. Julia, do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, well, I think this is where the program's really sort of great, in that we can really make it bespoke to what it is that's going to really support your project and your practice. So I think this year I'll be looking after the practice-based dissertation, and it's one of my key roles is to match mentors to students. But there's a lot of discussion about who's appropriate. So you can, and also because there's so much sort of expertise and connections with prominent sort of figures, is that if you say, you want somebody particular and you think, oh no, that's not going to be possible because they'll be out of reach, Dominic has has the most amazing contact book, and we've managed to really find some really excellent mentors to support the projects. And this is a dialogue, because we're wanting to support your projects and your work in the best possible way. So it's not about us. We don't have any vested interest in foisting anybody on you. This is a total conversation between you and me and others on the programme to find out who's going to be best to support that, and also to make suggestions that you might not have thought about that might kind of test your work in a particular sort of way. So yeah, a lot of dialogue and a lot of conversations about that.
And just I was trying to rack my brain. It feels quite a long time ago now, but in 2 years ago, some of the mentors included in the 2 years before last year, they included, for example, Kira O'Reilly, Jamie McMurray, Lauren Barry Holstein, Liz Rosenfeld, Simon Vincenzi, Daniel Oliver, all sorts of really sort of, exciting people. Great. Question from Moya. Oh, you're still muted. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, hi. I'm just wondering, with the academic year, is it a traditional semester? Because I know that or is it more intensive from July to July?
So it's taught in 12-week semesters. So it will be from September, the middle towards the end of September through to December, and then you have a brief gap for the summer, and then you have January to about March, April, and then you have a small break, and then the summer when you write your dissertation. So from about April, May, you are very much up to your own devices in that you're working then intensively and independently with either your academic supervisor or with your artist mentor and the convener of the PBRP module.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. We have a question from Janie.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry if this seems a little bit long-winded, but I didn't go to university for drama. I went to undergraduate for communications, but I do have professional theater experience. I've been in New York for the past 4 years. So would I still be eligible for this?
Yes. So yeah, you would. This is where your personal statement would come in, come into play. Similarly for Farouk earlier, that the onus is very much on you to explain your suitability. So I would want your personal statement to explain perhaps what your degree has given you. So if it gave you relevant analytic skills or breadth of knowledge or similar, to think how it has prepared you. Then to think about how your practice as an artist, as a theatre artist, has also informed your work, your way of thinking about live art or similar, and then to go on and say all the other interesting things that we hope the personal statement would say. So yes, we are not looking, I think if you had a chemistry degree, it would be a bit more complicated, but also not impossible to explain how it prepared you. But the fact that you've done an arts and humanities or humanities and social science degree means that we would assume that you're probably broadly well suited.
Thank you for that. That really helps. And just one more, sorry. So I'm looking to sort of learn more about immersive theater, site-specific performance. And I know in the slides you did mention site-specific performance. So what sort of, I guess I would say, content would you have for someone like me who is interested in this type of study?
Great. So I would say in a number of ways. One would be in the Live Art Histories module, you're introduced to a broad range of histories, and there's a sort of level of independence, necessary to postgraduate study, which would allow you to, for example, focus on an interesting example of immersive or site-specific work for your essay or for a presentation. Because actually at postgraduate level, there's the sort of guided content, but the emphasis is very much on you and the cohort, the group of students, kind of creating the curriculum with us. So if there was an area of practice that you were very invested in, we would sort of expect or kind of demand your interests to lead the direction of travel in the program or in the module. Similarly, I think in Performance Lab, it would be down to you to shift the kind of processes that you're being introduced in towards your interest in immersive technology, immersive design, immersive participatory practices, and so on. Or to think, well, actually, I'm not interested in performing in a black box. Maybe your work would always be to do a site-specific, site-responsive work and find ways to document or show it in the space. So this is a really good question, because it reminds me of what I was sort of trying to say at the beginning about the kind of inherent promiscuity or versatility of the program, that it invites you to pull the direction of travel into surprising directions. And I think both the examples you've given are good examples of how we would hope really to broaden the understanding of what live art might mean. That said, that it depends in a way on what kinds of work you're thinking about, because there might also be a way to foster similar interests in a much more traditional program. So I think it would be down to you to decide, do you want to push these into a space where those categories are contested, or do you want to find a way that they sit much more neatly within more orthodox or traditional histories? If you want to contest it and think critically, we're the place for you. But there will also be other programs that might also be a good home.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that. Those answered my questions very well. Thank you.
Great. Do we have more questions? Thoughts?
So we've got 3 minutes to run. So we've got Catherine with a hand up.
Great, Catherine.
Hi, I was just going to see, you mentioned the personal statement, or what other kind of like portfolio requirements do you look for in the application process?
Great, thank you. So there's no requirement for a portfolio. We ask you to, if you identify as an artist or have a practice as an artist, we ask you to find a way to write critically and in an informed way in your personal statement about that work. You can make a link to some material if you think that's useful and will help your case, and we'll happily look at it. But there's no formal requirement to, say, upload a particular number of slides or similar. And this is because we do approach this very much as necessarily an academic approach. We are an academic department in a university, and so we are artists and practitioners, but there's this need to be able to, from the outset, conceive of and explain your work in sort of critical terms. This leads me to want to sort of say a bit more about the personal statement, that a personal statement should demonstrate your preparedness, your aptitude for postgraduate study. And so one of the key tips I always give is, don't tell us what you like or what the things that have given you pleasure. Think really about what you've learned from your practice, the ways it intersects with different contexts. Who are your touchstones, either critically or artistically? What kind of context do you want to see your work circulating in? Those will tell us a lot more than a kind of episodic biographical statement or similar. One of the kind of frequent things that happens is people tell us about your kind of path to being an artist, which is sort of anecdotally interesting, but actually doesn't tell us as much about what you think your work does.
Or why you want to study live art and what it is that you want to test or develop or whatever. So that personal statement is really crucial. I mean, I think your plotted history can be in a CV. So that's also something that you submit along with your personal statement, and also getting the references is really important too.
Yeah. Great. And we typically do, so those references should be academic, but if there's one of those which you think is could usefully be from an artist or an employer in when you've worked in a sort of in the cultural industries or similar, that's also fine, but one of those at least should be an academic reference. Lois.
I was going to say, for someone who's applying from your undergraduate course, for references, where would I get that from? Because I presume I can't get references from you guys. I don't know how that would work.
No, you can. You can ask anyone. Yeah, so Julia or I could happily write a reference. The reference is as much for us as it is for the university. So the university has a kind of due diligence to make sure that you're qualified, not just on paper, but also, in principle. And then we do use that as well, but we wouldn't, necessitate you having a reference from someone else. So I would say, just, for most people actually, choose a referee who can talk to your aptitude, your preparedness for this program and or for postgraduate study in general. So choose the person who you feel will understand you and your work and be able to give a kind of informed account of your capabilities.
I've also got another question, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Do you find that normally people have like a form that they go with and that kind of adapts to the different modules, or do they go through like different, does that make sense? Well, there are different things in different modules and there's no real theme, or would you say that someone comes in with a clear practice that adapts to the different modules?
I think it's a range. I think that there are some people who come in, they've been making their own work for a few years. They come in and they find ways to develop it in quite a focused manner. Then there are as many people who take a very different approach, which is that they come with their way of working, but they want to challenge it to think what other ways might be available. And actually those students often really are the ones that sort of thrive, to really want to put one's practice under scrutiny. And then there are people who would not describe themselves as having a practice, that they're earlier in that process of development, or I can think of a really good example of someone who was a mature student who had approached live art really exclusively through facilitating, working in cultural venues, and by studying, but wanted to test whether or not they could make something, and that person absolutely thrived as well. So I think there's not one set pattern or ideal situation even. I think you want to approach postgraduate study with the hope that it will open up, extend, deepen, broaden your existing practice or your existing interests, whether that's to kind of consolidate them into a practice or to do something else.
Great,
thank you.
Great questions, Lois. So we're after 6 now, so I think it's time to shut down the screens and go and have a drink or something. Just to say, if there's any last sort of questions, you can always sort of email us. If you've got other things, there's going to be another event in a couple of weeks' time. I can't remember what the date is.
18th.
And just to say thank you very much to Dominic for amazing overview of everything, and fantastic answers to the questions. Thanks very much for your time, Dominic, and thank you to Faisal and Rupert for being here. No more questions. We'll say goodbye.
Great.
Thanks very much for attending.